The dynamic of this race is changing very rapidly, so much so that it's difficult for me to keep up. Because we had Pete Buttigieg drop out on Sunday, Amy Klobuchar drop out on Monday, and going into Super Tuesday, now there's a little bit more of a question because it did seem as if, in spite of Joe Biden's huge victory in South Carolina, Bernie Sanders would still sweep. But now, with more candidates out of the race and other candidates absorbing some of that base of support from Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, also Tom Steyer, now that he's dropped out, it seems as if individuals who weren't necessarily looking viable in states like California and Texas now are doing a little bit better. There was a poll before anyone dropped out from California that showed that Bernie Sanders was leading with 34%, and no other candidate crosses that 15% viability threshold, which is crucial. So even if, let's say, a lot of Pete Buttigieg's supporters go to Bernie Sanders, just the fact that Elizabeth Warren, for example, gets a fraction more, just enough to push her over that viability threshold, she's taking more pledged delegates away from Bernie Sanders and keeping him from getting a majority, with hopes that she can take it from him at the convention. Because as we all know, Bernie is likely going to be the winner of pledged delegates when it's all said and done. He's going to have a plurality. But the goal from other Democrats, namely the establishment, is to keep him from getting to that magic number of 1991. So, with Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar dropping out, I want you to understand what this is. This is an attempt to stop Bernie Sanders. The establishment is quickly coalescing around Joe Biden because they want to stop Bernie Sanders. Because, look, they're not just going to allow all of the candidates as it stands to go into Super Tuesday and get blown out by Bernie Sanders. So this was a last-ditch effort to stop him. And of course, from the Daily Beast, there's already more McCarthyist smears against Bernie Sanders that Russia is rooting for Bernie Sanders. So as I predicted, they're pulling out all the stops, but there's one new piece of news that we learned. Pete Buttigieg is endorsing Joe Biden. It hasn't happened yet, not official, but it will happen very soon. But the reason why it's happening, it tells us a lot about the state of the race. So as Justine Coleman of The Hill reports, former President Obama spoke with former presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg after he dropped out of the 2020 race Sunday, the New York Times reported Monday. Obama reportedly did not directly tell Buttigieg to endorse former Vice President Joe Biden, but he did tell the former South Bend, Indiana mayor that he now has leverage and should consider how to use it, a Democratic official familiar with the conversation told the Times. A source confirmed to The Hill on Monday that Buttigieg plans to endorse Biden, who is also set to get the backing of Senator Amy Klobuchar, who will announce the end of her own 2020 White House bid on Monday. Now, as you know, she already dropped out, but it's interesting because Obama doesn't want to be seen as directly, nudging Pete Buttigieg in that direction, but if you just drop out of the race and you get a call from the former president who has the former vice president currently running, who Obama is very obviously rooting for, obviously, what Obama wanted Buttigieg to do was to endorse Joe Biden. So that was implicit in that phone call, even if he didn't explicitly say, hey, do me a solid, Buttigieg, why don't you endorse my buddy Biden for me? That's obvious that, Obama wanted that to happen, right? Nobody can deny that. So what I say to that is, welcome to the primary, Barack Obama, because, there were reports early on that Obama was going to step up and stop Bernie in the event it looked like he was going to run away with the nomination. And we're kind of in that situation currently. But then there were conflicting reports saying that, Obama will support the nominee no matter what, and he doesn't actually want to get involved in the primary because if he makes an endorsement, that kind of tarnishes his legacy because people who viewed him positively are no longer going to view him that way. He's going to have half the base hate him. So what he's trying to do is pull strings behind the scenes very quietly, maybe nudge people to judge in the correct direction so nobody notices, but we know what's happening. Obama is trying to make sure that everyone in the party coalesces behind Joe Biden. There's a reason why members of Congress are coming out to endorse him all of a sudden. We have Tammy Duckworth endorsing Joe Biden. This is all happening very, very fast because Super Tuesday will have 15 states vote? If Bernie Sanders sweeps, then Once you get that ball rolling, it's like a snowball effect. The momentum just builds and builds and builds to where it's very possible that he does get a majority of pledged delegates and they can't really steal it as easily, right? They can still attempt something. They can try to change the rules before the convention, but stealing it is a lot easier if he only goes into the convention with a plurality, right? Now, it's frustrating because getting a majority is very rare. I think it was John Kerry who's the last person in recent history to actually secure a majority of pledged delegates. So, in order for us to win, we have to overperform. Joe Biden is saying, there's an article that I'm going to talk about in a different video, that in the event nobody reaches a majority, he will contest the convention. So they're not going to just allow Bernie Sanders to win. They don't care that a brokered convention is basically going to communicate to voters that the party's in chaos, which helps Trump. They don't care if stealing it from Bernie outright gives it to Donald Trump. This is ultimately about power, right? The Democratic Party establishment, win or lose, to Donald Trump in November, they have to make sure that they remain in power. This is about self-interest. This is about the consultant class remaining in power, still having jobs, and that all ends if Bernie takes over the party. Even if Bernie loses to Donald Trump, he takes control of the Democratic Party apparatus. He is the head of the DNC, effectively, once he wins the nomination. So they're going to do whatever they can, and their goal is not to defeat Donald Trump. The goal is to defeat Bernie Sanders. We have to be very clear about that. So if you truly care about beating Donald Trump, if you're a voter and you're a little bit hesitant to back Bernie Sanders, I need you to understand that Bernie's chances against Donald Trump, it's not a guarantee, but he has the strongest chance at defeating Donald Trump. And in the event that nomination is taken from Bernie Sanders, that will destroy the party and almost guarantee a Donald Trump victory. And not just that, a victory for Republicans for decades to come. Because if you have people voting for the first time, millennials, Zoomers, and they see that all the time and effort that they put into getting Bernie elected, phone banking, text banking, canvassing for Bernie Sanders is just undermined like that, it's not going to bode well. So what we all have to do is focus on getting Bernie Sanders a majority. So if you have a friend who supports Elizabeth Warren, if you have a friend who supports Joe Biden, let them know what's at stake. We've got a little over a decade to act on climate change. 4 more years of Donald Trump could spell the end of our planet's habitability for us. So there's a lot at stake and we can't risk it. But Democrats, they're so self-interested, so arrogant that they don't care about anything but maintaining the status quo, which means they remain in power, which wouldn't be the case if Bernie's the nominee. So this is all happening. The establishment is quickly coalescing around Joe Biden because that's the only way that they can defeat Bernie Sanders. Now, back in 2016, when everyone was running against Donald Trump and nobody wanted to drop out, there was no figure like Obama to really get everyone else, to coalesce around Ted Cruz or John Kasich. Because George W. Bush was delegitimized. He was hated by America. So he had absolutely no credibility or political capital whatsoever. But that's not necessarily the case with Barack Obama. Like it or not, his words have sway. So if he comes out and endorses Joe Biden, that's going to carry weight. And I don't think he's going to do that yet. But in the event Bernie still overperforms on Super Tuesday and it really looks like Bernie's going to get a majority, don't sit, don't rest, because then we're going to see even more coalescing behind Joe Biden. An Obama endorsement could make a difference. So it's never going to be over until he's the nominee. And that's when we try to take on Donald Trump, which will probably be a more fair fight than the battle that we're dealing with now. We just have to win the nomination. But then we fight like hell to defeat Donald Trump. But I just need you to understand that as more and more people drop out, it's all going to help Joe Biden. It's all part of a concerted effort to beat Bernie Sanders because none of them want Bernie Sanders to win because he is a threat to the establishment and the moneyed interests that prop up the Democratic Party. That's what it is. So yesterday, Pete Buttigieg dropped out, and today, Amy Klobuchar is dropping out. Now, this is actually shocking. I said this about Pete Buttigieg yesterday, but the idea in my mind at least, when you think about this strategically, was that by him dropping out, this would push everyone else above that 15% viability threshold. And with Amy Klobuchar at least staying in the race until after Super Tuesday, then she would be able to keep Bernie Sanders from winning Minnesota. But that has not happened. She announced that she's dropping out and she will be endorsing Joe Biden, presumably later today, if not already by the time that you see this video. So understand what's happening. Everyone is coalescing around Joe Biden. The establishment has made it very clear that that's the person that they're going with because they can't risk it. So what does this mean for the remaining candidates in the race? Well, it means that perhaps Joe Biden's vote totals increases now, because certainly I can't imagine that many Amy Klobuchar supporters will go to Bernie Sanders. But what we have now is a significant portion of the left splitting votes between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But Mike Bloomberg is still likely siphoning more votes away from Joe Biden than anyone else. Now, it doesn't seem as if he's likely to drop out before Super Tuesday, maybe not even after Super Tuesday, because he's currently purchasing superdelegates. He's hiring them to work for his campaign in an effort to steal the nomination away from Bernie Sanders, because Politico reported just last week that his entire strategy is to have a brokered convention to take the nomination away from Bernie Sanders. So it doesn't seem likely that Bloomberg will exit the race anytime soon, but with the rate that things are changing and shifting rapidly, I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen. But so long as Elizabeth Warren remains in this race, then strategically for progressives, it is better to have Mike Bloomberg there, so that way they both take away about the same percentage from the respective frontrunner on their lane. So Bloomberg takes votes away from Biden. Without him, they'd likely go to Biden. And then Elizabeth Warren is taking votes away from Bernie Sanders. Without her in this race, they would likely go to Bernie Sanders. So this is very quickly becoming a two-person race between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And what this tells you is that the individuals who are remaining in this race don't actually care about policies, be it progressivism or centrism. They're running because of their egos. Elizabeth Warren at this point, with no clear path to the nomination, she's really showing her cards. And I'm going to have a separate video. I talked about this in my Pete Buttigieg dropout video about Elizabeth Warren and what her path towards the nomination is, which there's none, but what her goal is currently. But by her staying in the race now with the moderates all coalescing around Joe Biden, it tells you she's not serious about progressive policies. And Mike Bloomberg, he was supposed to be the savior, for lack of a better word, because Joe Biden was performing very poorly and was not projected to win very many early states. But now, with the race kind of changing, with him having a huge victory in South Carolina, Mike Bloomberg is also proving, like Elizabeth Warren, that to him it's not necessarily about centrism and stopping Bernie Sanders. It's about his ego. So what we have now are Elizabeth Warren and Mike Bloomberg, two very large presences, capturing a fairly large percentage of vote totals in states on Super Tuesday, keeping it from really becoming the two-person race that it seems like it will ultimately be reduced down to. But Amy Klobuchar will be endorsing Joe Biden. Pete Buttigieg now will be endorsing Joe Biden. I have a separate video for that because there's a little bit more details that I think you'll find interesting. But that's where we're at. Amy Klobuchar dropped out. Pete Buttigieg dropped out. And not to mention, Tom Steyer dropped out the day of the South Carolina primary. Actually, right after I posted my video, he dropped out. So I didn't get to cover it, but he's not necessarily much of a threat in any other state. South Carolina was really his only shot to perform, and he came in third. So I think it makes sense for him to drop out. So this is very quickly becoming a Bernie versus Biden race. How quickly it really becomes a Bernie versus Biden race depends on Mike Bloomberg and Elizabeth Warren currently, but more on that later. For now, Klobuchar is backing Biden, probably because she wants to be his VP. And I don't know that that is going to happen. I think that he probably promised her something, some type of sway or leverage. But just on Sunday, she had Black Lives Matter protesters rightfully shut down one of her rallies because of her acts as a prosecutor at jailing an innocent black man. So it wouldn't be something that Biden should consider if he's serious about maintaining the black vote, now with Bernie Sanders coming up on his heels and winning over voters in all categories of generations and all demographics. So, I don't know what she was promised, but clearly, you've got to give her a little bit of respect for putting her own ego aside and trying to do what she thinks is best. Now, I disagree with her unequivocally on basically everything. She's a centrist ghoul who doesn't want to give voters anything. Still, she is putting her ego aside and suspending her campaign to promote someone who she knows has a better chance of winning than her. And, in a way, you have to respect it, because when you see what Elizabeth Warren is doing, someone who everyone thought was more principled than that, it's just a matter of when are you going to do what Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar is doing, albeit for Bernie Sanders, right? And we're getting indications that she's not going to do that anytime soon. But, for now, Klobuchar's out, and that's where we're at.